Today we're going to be talking about Sigmund Freud. Freud's psychology is no longer taken very seriously, but it had a huge impact on the 20th century. It is something that was not only important in psychology for a time, but also led to a sort of cultural commentary and a whole family of schools of cultural commentary, many of which still exist. If Freud isn't taken that seriously any longer in psychology departments, he still is taken seriously in a variety of other departments at universities connected to cultural studies. Initially, he began by studying dreams and wrote a book in 1902, The Interpretation of Dreams, that ended up having a large impact. That's what I asked you to read part of. Now, that was earlier than the 1920s, but it was in about the 1920s that Freudian ideas became very, very popular. It was then that he began giving general lectures on psychoanalysis, that he took his insights and began consciously forming a school of psychoanalytic thought. It was then that this became important in popular culture, that everybody suddenly knew about Freud and could talk about Freudian theory. So although the essentials of the theory had been worked out 2 decades earlier, it was really in the 1920s that Freud's ideas began to have their influence felt across a wide range, and in which his theories took something like their mature form. There are several different stages: the interpretation of dreams, then the development of psychoanalysis, then a crucial change in that with the publication of his book Beyond the Pleasure Principle, and then finally the cultural commentary that he engaged in after that. Let's go back to the beginning of the book, The Interpretation of Dreams. He starts it this way. There is a psychological technique which makes it possible to interpret dreams. So dreams are a feature of our lives. Sometimes you're aware of dreaming a lot, other times not very aware. Sometimes you can remember dreams, a lot of times you can't, or at least can't remember them for very long. But in any case, he says, look, dreams are not just random. There is a way of interpreting dreams. They make sense from a certain point of view. And if you employ this procedure, he says every dream reveals itself as a psychical structure that has 2 important qualities. First of all, it has a meaning. It is possible to give an interpretation. Dreams have meanings. And secondly, those meanings can be inserted at an assignable point in the mental activities of waking life. That is to say, they have a meaning that applies to your everyday waking life. It's not just some separate field of meaning or some irrelevant field of meaning. It has a meaning in relation to the rest of your life. So we have a way, he says, of finding out what dreams mean and how those meanings interact with the rest of your life. What you dream has something to do with the rest of, well, what you're thinking about, what you're experiencing, the rest of your life. Well, yes. So we're going to get to this question of then what a dream is. Now, some of you may remember dreams you had last night or have had recently. What are dreams in general like?
Weird.
Weird, okay? Dreams are weird. What else is true of them?
Short.
They're often short, exactly.
They're always changing.
They're always changing, yes. Things change not only from one dream to the next, but within a dream it seems like things change very rapidly. Ooh, okay, good. You can change from a first-person perspective to suddenly being an observer, and it's like a third-person thing. People you're interacting with can change suddenly. You're talking to one person, and all of a sudden it's a different person. And yet within the dream, you don't seem to notice. Other things, yeah.
They're very surreal.
They're surreal, yes, indeed. We're going to see a number of artistic movements in the century, like surrealism, that are inspired by dreams. There are artists who begin writing novels, taking photographs, doing paintings, doing sculptures that are meant in some way to reflect the structure of dreams rather than waking life. What else? Yeah?
Horrifying.
Horrifying. Okay, dreams are sometimes horrifying. Sometimes dreams are pleasant, sometimes they're just neutral, but sometimes they're terrifying. Yeah?
Sometimes they're kind of fuzzy,
Okay. Well, good. Dreams often have this fuzzy feel to them, right? Ordinary life feels quite precise. I don't know how many people are in this room right now. As Holmes would put it, I am seeing, I'm seeing, but I'm not observing. I'm not really paying attention to that. But I have no doubt that if I did start counting, I could count the number of people in the room. It's not like it's fuzzy. And over back there, it's just unclear whether there's a person in that seat or not. No, it's clear, okay? There is a determinate number of people in the room. Whereas in a dream, it often seems that the boundaries are fuzzy. Where were you exactly? How many people were there? It all has this weirdly indeterminate feel to it. Other things that are characteristic of dreams, yeah. They can be very intense. Yes, a lot of waking life is not that intense. In fact, I've sometimes thought, I was in Las Vegas at one point, in fact, looking at a GoPro camera in a shop. And it was very impressive. And I told the guy, look, I would buy one of these if I ever did anything interesting. But on the other hand, imagine a movie, a day in the life of a college professor. Okay? And so imagine the GoPro here, and you're seeing things through my eyes for a day. It's going to be really dull, right? Nobody's going to want to go to that movie. And so you might think, yeah, shoot, most of us have lives that are like that. Most of life isn't that intense. It's a little bit unfocused and boring, to be honest. Whereas, if you start thinking about dreams, it doesn't have that feeling. Dreams tend to be intense. You're thoroughly involved in the dream. Other things about dreams. Yeah? Okay, they can seem real at the time, and yet there are things that happen in them that could never happen in real life. What are those? Well, actually, we've talked about one of those, where the person in front of you just suddenly transforms into a different person. Are there other things in real life, or in dreams that happen that could never happen in real life?
You fly.
Okay, maybe you fly. Or, yeah.
I had a dream in second grade that Pikachu was my pet.
Oh, that's an awesome dream. Okay, she dreamed that Pikachu was her pet. That couldn't happen in real life. I've had dreams where I'm suddenly in one part of the country and then suddenly talking to somebody in another part of the country, and it's like, no, I don't feel the thing. I can't suddenly now instantaneously be in Pennsylvania, but in the dream it can happen. It can feel like that. Yeah.
Kind of in the opposite way, you can't read things in dreams or tell time.
Oh, good. There are things you don't seem to be able to do in dreams. Like you can't read. You can't tell time. There are other things that, like a monster is chasing you, and at least in my dream, I can't get away, right? I'm trying to run. It's like I can't run. I can't move. It's like my feet are stuck in clay or something. Yeah.
Okay, two things. One, what's really creepy is that like your brain can't create faces, so every person in your dream you've seen at some point in your life. And two, if you look at your hands, they'll be blurry. It's pretty weird.
Well, that's really weird. Okay, she says, first of all, everybody you've ever seen in a dream, you've actually seen at some point in real life. That's frightening. The second one is that if you look at your hands in a dream, they're fuzzy. I don't remember ever seeing my hands in a dream, but you might be right. I don't know. Yeah. Okay, some people have the ability to have very lucid dreams. So yes, this feeling of how different a dream is from waking life may vary from person to person or even within the dreams of an individual person. Some might feel very indeterminate, and others seem very lucid and very, very clear. Yeah?
I guess kind of opposite of that, you can also get something like sleep paralysis, where you're trapped in that dream, or it feels like you are, and so you can feel trapped.
Oh, yes, you can feel trapped in the dream. Actually, that's happened to me, where I wake up and I fall asleep again and I'm back in the same dream. And it's very frustrating, right? It's weird because I want it to change often. I'm thinking, okay, that was a bad dream. I don't want to go back there. And then I'm right back in the same place. I also don't know if you've had this experience, but I've had the experience that I'm in a place in the dream that's very familiar. Like there's a house, and it feels very familiar, like I know this house very well. And yet I wake up, and there's still that image in my mind of what the house was like. And I would swear I've never seen anything like it, right? I was like, what? Why did that feel familiar? I don't, and yet in the dream I had the sense that I had been there many times before. Yeah?
So I know this was mentioned in the reading, but sometimes I have a dream when I keep snoozing my alarm that I wake up and start checking my phone and replying to texts, and I wake up again and realize I never did that.
Oh, wow, yes, you wake up and then you fall back to sleep and you have this dream that you're awake and doing things, and yes, Yes, I have dreamt that I was dreaming, and then I wake up within the dream, but I'm still dreaming. It's like there's a dream within a dream. I think this comes from taking too many English courses when I was young. Play within a play, a dream within a dream. Anyway, there are lots of things like this that seem to differentiate dreams from waking life. So let's think about whether there is something that all of these dreams have in common. Do all dreams have the same function? You might think the default is to say no, right? Just as, do all sentences that people utter have the same function? Well, no. Some are questions. Some are statements. Some are commands. Some are just interjections. And so on. And so there are all sorts of things that sentences can do. Well, why should all dreams do the same thing? But Freud says actually they do. They all have the same function. When the work of interpretation has been completed, we perceive that a dream is the fulfillment of a wish. Every dream is a wish fulfillment. So whatever you dream is fulfilling some wish of yours. That is his central claim. Now, you might think, gosh, why aren't our dreams better if they're from the fulfillments of wishes? But that, by the way, is a picture of Freud's office and the couch that his patients would lie down on. That thing of, you lie down on the couch and talk about your childhood and so on, that's really what Freud had people do, and there's the couch. Yeah?
You just said, our dreams are wishes, how come we wish our dreams are always good? Is it because, just because you makes this, a wish, just because you wish it, instead of becoming good?
Ooh, all right, well that's an important observation, which is not all wishes are such that if they were fulfilled it would be a good thing, right? And indeed, that's going to be a major component of his theory. We have wishes that would not be good if they were actually put into practice. And so part of what's going on with dreaming, as we'll see, is that some of these wishes can't be actually thought about in waking life, so they have to be thought about when you're asleep, and they often take a rather different form. Now, in a way, but yeah, the Disney thing, you know why I put that there? Cinderella, the song. A dream is a wish your heart makes. Okay, that's an expression of Freud's central claim. Now, he does offer many examples of dreams as wish fulfillments. And so he gives pretty strong support to the claim that a dream is sometimes a fulfillment of a wish. But there's a really obvious objection, which is what? Nightmares, exactly, bad dreams. Lots of dreams do not seem like they're good at all. Let me blow that up so you can see it better. I mean your nightmares, your souls. Okay. But yes, it looks like, wait a minute, nightmares are not things I want to happen. I don't want to be chased down a hallway by a large monster. I don't want somebody to suddenly do something terrible. And so there are lots of things I don't want to have happen. But even if something isn't quite a nightmare, there are lots of dreams that seem to express a fear, an anxiety, right? Have you ever had the dream that you show up for class and suddenly there's an exam and you realize it's a class that you forgot you were even taking. So you haven't even been attending and all of a sudden it's exam day and you're sitting there in your underwear and so on, right? Or the professor's version of this is that all of a sudden the chairman calls you into his office and he says, hey, why haven't you been teaching your course on blah, blah, blah? And it's halfway through the term, and I didn't realize I was supposed to teach this class. And suddenly I found out, wait, I'm teaching medieval English literature? And it's always something I don't know anything about, right? That or Japanese language or something crazy that I don't know anything about. And so it's November and I'm supposed to be teaching this class. So I go running over to the classroom, and amazingly, the students are all there. They've been sitting there, coming to class faithfully for months with no professor, and staring at the wall, getting angrier and angrier. So I walk in finally, and everybody's there and really angry at me, and I suddenly have to stand up and start talking about some subject I know nothing about. So anyway, that's the professor version of this. The philosopher version of it is you suddenly find yourself at a conference and people say, well, all right, you're the next speaker. It's like, wait, I have to give a talk? Like, about what? And all of a sudden they hand you the microphone and you're up there in front of this room full of professional philosophers and you're thinking, I don't have a talk prepared, I have no idea what to say. And then you come up with something. And the amazing thing is, I come up with something in the dream, and I wake up and I think, that was brilliant. And then I tell somebody else the idea, and they say, that's stupid. Anyway, it seems brilliant in the dream. Now, okay, so we have things like that. We have dreams that are unpleasant, even if they're not terrifying the way a nightmare is. There's something that seems bad about them. And then, I don't know about you, but I have a lot of really boring dreams. I don't tend to remember them for very long, but if I wake up right then and think, okay, I was having a dream, but it was dull. It's like, if, maybe what I said before about a difference is not true for me. If you had a GoPro that was recording my dreams, it would be just as boring as my waking life for the most part. And so, there are a lot of dreams that feel like that. Now, how do you explain all of that? Freud says, here's the key. You have to draw a distinction between the manifest and the latent content of the dream. Now this should remind you of something, right? The manifest versus the scientific image. Just as waking life consists of an experience that constitutes our manifest image of the world, but is really an artifact of this underlying scientific image of the world, so we have a manifest content of the dream, the way the dream appears to us, but it is really being driven by the latent content, by these other things below the surface that we are not consciously aware of. Well, the manifest content, in the case of a nightmare, is distressing. In the case of a dream that shows a fear or anxiety, yeah, it's disturbing. Even a boring one, okay, it's boring. But the latent content, he says, is nevertheless, in each case, a wish fulfillment. So we've got this two-level analysis. He says whenever the wish is unrecognizable from the manifest content of the dream, where it's been disguised, there must have been some inclination to put up a defense against the true nature of the dream, against the wish that the dream is trying to express. But it's unable to, and so it finds expression in a distorted shape. And that, he thinks, is what's going on in these cases. There is some underlying wish, but that wish is disturbing. There are features of that wish that your conscious mind, even in sleep, is not willing to look at. And so what happens is that that wish gets distorted and gets expressed in some other form. So he says, we learn from this that there are different psychic forces within the mind. One of those psychic forces constructs the wish to be expressed. Okay? It is the part of you that's saying, I want whatever it is. Now, I'm not saying what it might be, because in the case of these dreams, it's too disturbing to even admit to yourself, even when you're asleep. And so it's as if this one part is saying things that are horrifying. I want, and then there's another part of the mind that says, wait a minute, no way. We aren't going to think about that one, okay? And allows thoughts to enter consciousness, but often in a distorted form. So, the picture is something like this. We've got a first agency. Later, he's going to call this the id, which is the one that is constructing the wishes. It contains basic human drives. It's the one constructing these wishes. Things like, I want to sleep with my mother. Okay? And then, there's a second agency in the mind. He'll later call this the superego, the censor, saying, no, we're not going to go there. Okay? Stop right there. And now, when that censor examines the wish that is being put forward by the first agency, the id, three things can happen. It might be that it's allowed, right? The censor might say, oh, you're hungry and you want food. Yeah, that's cool. You can express your wish to have food. And so then you have this dream where the manifest content actually is the fulfillment of the wish. That is to say, maybe you're dreaming that you're at this wonderful banquet. And so, yeah, that's fun. You can want food. Sometimes it gets utterly repressed. You want to sleep with your mother? No way. I'm not even going to allow that out in distorted form. Just get back down there. Okay? Throw it in reverse, get back. And then, often, and this is where you have a dream that does not look as if you've got a wish fulfillment. It's expressed, but in a distorted form. You want to do that? Well, we're not going to allow that, but I'll tell you what. Maybe you'd like to be a monster running through the hallways, chasing people. I'm not going to allow that wish, but I'll allow you to be chased by a monster, okay? Or what are other ways? You have this desire to, let's say, achieve recognition, and you haven't been recognized. Well, it's kind of embarrassing to the mind to admit that you want people to like you and you think they don't. So I will allow this in a distorted form. I will allow you to be at a party where you're feeling a little uncomfortable and you're looking for someone to talk to. And then someone comes to talk to you, but it turns out that person gets scarier and scarier until you feel like you have to leave the party. That's not quite a nightmare, but it's an uncomfortable sort of dream. And the idea is, what, I want to talk to weird people at parties? No, you want to be liked. And it's getting expressed in this distorted form. Now, that gives us a picture in the interpretation of dreams, where there are really two functions of the mind, these two agencies. One is creative. It allows for the construction. It constructs, I guess you could say, these wishes, these desires, and dreams express desires on the part of that first agency. But the second agency is defensive. It's not creative. It doesn't introduce new things. What it does is stop other things and force them into other pathways. In fact, people have said that the model of the mind that exists in the interpretation of dreams is a hydraulic model. Think of fluid flowing through a sort of system of tubes. If something is trying to get out, is exerting pressure, and it can't come out here, it's going to come out elsewhere. So think about a sort of plumbing model of the mind where you've got these hydraulic forces and you've got certain valves that are opened or closed, and the sensor is the one opening and closing the valves. It says, yeah, no, we're not going to allow that valve to be open today, and so we're going to close that valve, but then the water goes over and comes out this other valve. So that's the general model. That seems to be the way he talks about it, the way he thinks about it. You constantly get these hydraulic metaphors. And the thought is the wishes of the first might be approved. You might say, open the valve, that's fine. Or maybe it closes the valve. It says, no, I'm disturbed by this, I'm distressed by it. And then that's going to find expression elsewhere. It might find expression in a dream and come through in distorted fashion. It might be repressed, it might be sublimated. It turns out in the mature theory, there are lots of things that now might happen. Lots of different types it might come out, and ways in which it might be expressed. Only some of those are dreams. Now, why isn't this going on all the time? Well, the thought is that, in other words, why are dreams different from waking life? It comes down to this. Sleep lowers the resistance of that second agency. You've got the creative agency, and it's going on there all the time in waking life and in sleep. However, it's kind of like the police, okay? The censor there, trying to stop things and only sometimes allowing them to move the roadblock. During the day, it's highly alert, and so it's very effective. If anything disturbing starts approaching consciousness during the day, it's immediately, boop, stop, get back there, okay? However, at the night shift is not nearly as alert, okay? So that agency is kind of like, all right. Things that would have been just stopped cold during the day get expressed, but often in a distorted form. And so those things, you might say both the wish fulfillment dreams, the pleasant dreams, but also these boring or unpleasant dreams, those are functions of the second agency allowing things into consciousness that it would never allow during the day. Well, he says what that means is that dreams are really a unique window into the unconscious mind. What really is going on in the id, that first agency that's producing things, during waking life, we really are not very aware of it. The sensor is so good at suppressing it all, sending it back, that actually we are unaware of all of this. But during dreams, we get some glimpse, though a distorted glimpse, through a glass darkly, as it were, of what's going on in the deep recesses of the mind. So he says there is something we learn here about the essential nature of consciousness. It is something that is itself a separate psychic act. There is the initial subconscious wish, desire, thought, and then, if the sensor approves it, admitting it to consciousness is a separate psychic act that is something that is different. You might think, look, what's going on in the mind? And this is the way classically people thought about this. David Hume, for example, who styled himself as the first psychologist, really thought that what's going on in the mind is a collection of thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and all of those are conscious. His image of the mind is of the conscious mind. And Freud is in effect saying, well, that's part of it, but that's only the part that the rest of your mind allows you to see. There's another subconscious part that's generating a huge amount of stuff, and then there's a sensor that allows only some of that into consciousness. By the mature theory, there are 3 parts of the self, not just 2. There is that creative agency, the first agency, as he talks about it in the interpretation of dreams, which is the id. It's the one that generates the desires, the wishes. There is also the superego, the sensor, but there is then the ego. The ego is really you. In fact, ego is just the Latin word for I. And so it is just the self, the part that relates to the external world. It's the part that decides, that acts. Where Hume is thinking about the thoughts, feelings, and perceptions of a person as constituting their mind, well, he's really talking about their ego, that part that is consciously aware, that is actually interacting with the rest of the world. But there is another part, that superego, which is something like the sensor in the interpretation of dreams. It observes the self and it makes judgments. It allows certain things into consciousness. It does not permit other things into consciousness. It is something like your conscience. And he says it is the internalization of parental authority. You initially have to get all sort of control of yourself from the outside. Your parents have to control you. But then you start, through identifying with your parents, to internalize that function of saying no. You can hear the inner voice say no. And you no longer have to have mommy and daddy there to say no. And at that point, you've got a superego. The superego is now the one who is saying, don't do that. Or in some cases saying, you ought to be doing that. And then the id is the part that is the it. Again, id is just Latin for it. As ego is Latin for I, and superego is Latin for above the I. Anyway, alien to the ego. It's dark. It is normally inaccessible. Dreams give you a kind of picture into this world, but only a partial and distorted picture. It gives you your instinctual needs and desires. It is the part that supplies energy to you, on the other hand. It's important that you have such an id. It's not bad per se, because what it's doing is giving you energy. It's the thing that is pushing the animal along. The ego and superego would be just sitting there observing, except that the id has desires. And the id is what is actually directing you to do some things. Each of these parts has some principle that guides it. And the id is governed by what he calls the pleasure principle, namely seek pleasure. The ego is constructed according to the reality principle. Deal with reality, okay? Focus on the world the way it is. And then the superego is the one that is basically operating and giving you moral commands. So this is something like a picture of the self. There is the devil Homer, right, which is like the id. There is the angel Homer, that's like the superego, and then Homer himself is like the ego. And so it's basically saying within each one of us is this voice saying, I want this, I want that, hubba hubba, how about that? Okay, and then another part that's saying, that would be wrong, I'm sorry, no. And then a part that you're consciously aware of that actually has to make decisions. Now sometimes you are aware of these desires and you're aware of the moral considerations, and a lot of that's admitted into consciousness. But much of the time it is not. We're really facing these kinds of things all the time, Freud says, and much of it is happening below the level of our conscious awareness. So here's another slightly more boring picture of that. The id saying, I want it now. The superego saying, you can't have it, it's not right. The ego saying, I need to do a bit of planning to get it. Now, Freud says, all of us have that sort of thing going on all the time. So, that makes life hard. Okay, why is life a difficult thing? Well, because within yourself, you've got to handle these different parts that all want different things, that are operating according to different principles. You've got the id operating on the pleasure principle. It is saying, seek pleasure. Food, ooh, that looks good, eat that food. Drink, ooh, that looks good, drink that. Ooh, you know, she looks cute, pursue her, etc., etc. It's saying stuff like that all the time. And the ego has to actually deal with reality. The ego is the one that's having to say, well, wait, no, I'm part of the real world. I can't just eat everything I want and drink everything I want and pursue everybody I find attractive and so on and so forth. I've got to actually deal with the real world. I've got to adapt myself. I've got to meet its demands. And then the superego is saying, well, and while you're doing that, while you're meeting its demands and pursuing your desires, you better be moral. So, you know, there might be some things that morally you should not eat, or you should not drink, or people morally you should not pursue, and so on and so forth. And so all of those have to be met by the ego. The ego has to deal with reality. It has to deal with its desires. It has to deal with the constraints of morality, law, etc. And so that's all hard, okay? If you didn't have any id, well, there'd be no desires to fulfill. Life would be a lot easier, though a lot duller. If you had no moral constraints, maybe life would be simpler. It might be considerably more violent, but it would be simpler. Life is hard because you've got to, in some way, deal with your desires, deal with the constraints of morality, deal with the real world, and find solutions to problems where often there's nothing that's going to make those three parts of the self entirely happy. Well, for a long time, really starting in the teens especially, and then in the 20s coming to its high point, that's the theory of the mind that Freud had been developing. But during the 1920s, he began increasingly to treat patients who were suffering from what we would now call post-traumatic stress syndrome. They were at the time dealing with something that they were thinking of as shell shock. People who had been in the war and kept having nightmares, kept having horrifying thoughts. They had seen terrible things in the trenches. And Freud was at this point trying to deal with some of these people as patients. And he realized, look, a lot of these people have suffered terrible trauma. Either themselves being hurt or have witnessed other people being hurt or killed. And they often dream of that trauma. They dream that they're back there in the trenches. They dream that they're seeing their best friend get blown up, or that they're seeing their own leg be hit by a shell. And this doesn't seem to be a wish fulfillment. They have no desire to relive that experiment or that experience. They, in fact, wish that it never happened. They find it horrifying. They're deeply disturbed by this. They definitely do not want to experience it again. There is no conscious desire for this. But now, at the latent level, he says, well, I'm having trouble finding an explanation. What exactly is going on here? What wish is being fulfilled by these replayings of traumatic experiences in the mind who's suffering from this? And he doesn't quite know what to do. So the difficulty is, how could we explain not just an ordinary nightmare, but that kind of reliving of a trauma, reliving that experience of your friend dying or of your leg being blown off? What do you say about something like that? Well, what are possibilities? He's claiming that all dreams are wish fulfillments, and now he turns to this kind of experience, and he doesn't know what to say. So what are his options? What could one say? I mean, one thing to say is maybe dreams aren't wish fulfillments. I was wrong. Normal dreams are wish fulfillments. This is an exceptional kind. But he never really goes there. Instead, he does other things. So what are some other possible options if he wants to hang on to that claim that all dreams are fulfillments of wishes? Yeah?
Just say that they're messed up.
Well, okay, that is one thing he could say. He could say, look, these people are messed up. That is to say, the normal psychic processes are not working properly. And so, in this case, this is not a normal distortion. This is something else, right? Just as something might be a brain injury that would lead people to perceive things very, very differently or something like that, you could say there's just been an interruption of normal psychic processes. And then you could take that in two ways. One is you could say these are weird dreams that are not wish fulfillments. Or you could say, well, actually, they do express a wish, but the wish is now being distorted in a way that we don't find in other cases. And so you could say, in any case, there's something really exceptional, something really damaged going on here. What are other options? Yeah?
It could be them trying to cope with it, maybe? Trying to find meaning of
that's really interesting. You could say, yes, there is a wish here. A wish that you could find a meaning in this event. The conscious mind can't find a meaning in it. But maybe this is the subconscious saying, I want that to mean something. It's too important. I want it to mean something. And so keeps replaying it, trying to find a meaning, an interpretation that makes sense at the conscious level. And it can't find it, which is why it keeps happening again and again. Yeah?
It's kind of a manifestation of survivor's guilt, the one you got there.
Oh, good. Survivor's guilt. That is actually very close to the answer he ends up giving. Maybe you feel guilty that you were not the one blown up, but instead it was your friend. Or maybe there's some sense in which you feel guilty. You lost a leg, but through the intervention of surgeons and so on, you managed to survive. Maybe you feel guilty about that. Yeah?
You can wish for it not to happen.
I love that explanation. He never really says that, but I think that would be a great explanation. You wish it didn't happen. This is the brain searching for another way out, right? You're there in the trench again. And let's say you're going to get hit by that shell and you're going to lose your leg. Your mind is trying to think through that situation again, finding another way out, right? In real life, you know your leg got blown off. But your mind is thinking, is there something else I could have done? How could that have been avoided? And is looking for a way of making that not happen. Look at it in this sense. Serious problem. And you have to live now with the consequences of that horrible problem. But this might be the mind trying to solve the problem. Where's the solution? In real life, we didn't find the solution, and I lost my leg, let's say, or my best friend died. But now I'm still trying to find a solution to the problem. So yeah, if I had been Freud, I would have liked an explanation like that one. I would have thought, that's the way to go. Your mind is trying to solve the problem, trying to figure out how to come up with the solution you didn't find in real life. Yeah?
Did Freud mention trauma anywhere in his works?
Yes, this inspires an entire book called Beyond the Pleasure Principle. And that's where there is a fundamental revision, an addition to the theory to try to come up with a solution to these cases. Well, you might think, that the normal functioning is disrupted. You might think that this is an attempt to solve the problem. You might think the theory is false. That wish that things turn out differently is sort of how I interpreted when I wrote this. You might also think among the dreamer's wishes are masochistic ones. Maybe the person wants to stop. Now, there is something that Freud says about this that actually goes along these lines. He says, the desire to repeat the trauma explains these dreams. But why do you want to repeat it? Well, he says, a desire to repeat the trauma is a desire for the past. In fact, here's another way of taking it. You might think, look, and if he had stopped here, it would have made more sense, I think. He could have said, look, it's an attempt to go back to a time when you still had your leg, when your friend was still alive. But then, knowing what happened, the brain replays the traumatic event. But it's an attempt to get back to before that happened. He says, yes, it's an attempt to get back to the past. But now he gives this big global theory. Think about the Earth and the whole history of the Earth. Before there was life, there was inorganic material. And so, if you take this desire for the past back far enough, it is a desire for the absence of life. It is a desire for death. And so he postulates that everybody has a death wish. That among our basic wishes is a wish for death. A wish to reunite ourselves with inorganic life, inorganic matter, to no longer be alive. There is this wish, you might say, just to go back to dust. The aim of all life, he concludes, is death. It's like the Sybil, right, in Eliot. What do you want, Sybil? I want to die. Well, that seems extreme. And it's actually, it's worse than extreme, but we're going to come back to that in a moment. Actually, before I go on with this, does that strike you as a plausible claim? We all seek death. Everyone wants to die. Now, of course, you want other things, so that's why we don't all immediately commit suicide, but among our basic drives is a drive for death. Yeah?
We have a tendency to escape suffering, but that doesn't explain trauma in the dream.
You say this doesn't explain trauma?
No, it doesn't at all.
Okay, why not?
Well, if we have a tendency to escape suffering, why does it appear at all in the dream?
Okay, good. Two things here. One is, what we're experiencing with these patients is a repetition of the suffering, a repetition of the trauma, not a repetition of death, right? In fact, the person did not themselves die. Maybe the friend did. Maybe they lost their leg or something, but they didn't die. And so it doesn't look like that repeated suffering through the same experience is something that actually could be interpreted as a desire for death. I mean, that would be the mind thinking, this time I hope the shell kills me. And that doesn't happen in the dream. And so what's going on here? It's not obvious that this does explain the phenomenon. Yeah.
I think it may be a little bit too extensive to say that all men want to die or have a death wish, but I think it would have been better to say that all humanity tries to cope with the way that they will eventually die. Trying to find a way to cope with it.
Okay, that would be a way of taking what you said a moment ago and generalizing it and saying, yes, those of us who have suffered trauma may repeat the trauma looking for another way out, another outcome that could have been, achieved there if only we had done the right thing. But you could say, maybe in general, the thing that worries us and leads to such dreams is this thought we're going to die, and attempting to solve that problem. We all face the problem of mortality. Now, of course, that generates the question, why don't we all have traumatic dreams? Why don't we all have dreams about our own deaths? But then you might say, well, actually, a lot of nightmares have that feeling. You just wake up before you die in a nightmare. But, you're running away from the monster, you jump off the building, and you realize there's nothing below. And then you wake up. You don't actually hit the pavement and die in the dream, but you might say maybe nightmares are really explained by that, and so these are continuous with nightmares in a certain way. Well, at this point, Freud doesn't write much anymore about individual psychology. He doesn't really advance the theory more. But he does start turning to that third period of his work where he begins discussing general civilizational issues, large-scale issues, religion, civilization, culture, and so on. And when he applies his theories to culture and civilization, he ends up saying society faces the same problems that the ego does. So society and all of us taken together are really something like a mind trying to deal with the problems within the mind. We've got to, as a society, meet the constraints of the id. We have to deal with people's desires, in other words. We have to meet the constraints of morality. And we have to meet the constraints of the external world. So society at large has to deal with the pleasure principle and the reality principle and morality. Well, now here is the problem that society then faces. Happiness of the people in a society requires some degree of satisfying desires. There's a need for novelty, he says, as well as a need for food and other basics. But this leads to a conflict with the superego and with reality, including other people who might want the same things. So, we've got to suppress or repress desires. And that, he says, is the basic goal of civilization, to repress desires. So just as within the self there is that second agency, the superego saying, censor, no, not going to do that one, not going to act on that one, and so on. A society also has to have a way of suppressing desire, a way of preventing people from achieving their desires. Civilization, in other words, is constantly at war with desire. So, it introduces these mechanisms, but that means civilization is at war with the id. Everybody deep down hates civilization, because civilization is the one now telling us no. He says our so-called civilization itself is to blame for a great part of our misery. We should be much happier if we were to give it up and go back to primitive conditions. Why? Because civilization is this big policeman saying no to our desires, and it frustrates us, we're angry at it, and he thought we were happier in general at a stage before civilization. So, civilization is built up in a way that really makes us neurotic. It is fighting our instinctual gratifications, our instinctual urges. And so he says, look, we are gentle, friendly creatures, wishing for love, who get along naturally with others. No, man is wolf to man. And so society's job is to keep us from tearing each other apart. But that means it makes us unhappy. And guilt is its primary tool. Society makes us guilty to constrain our behavior. That's the price of civilization. Well, let me just say one thing. Oh yeah. There is a lot of made-up social science in this. Here is how religion started. Sons overthrew and killed their father. There's this whole thing about the role of men versus women and peeing on fires to put them out. It's pretty preposterous. Anyway, Karl Popper was a philosopher of science who critiqued Freud, and I can say this in 15 seconds, don't worry. He said, look, once you've introduced the death wish, the theory no longer makes any predictions, because a death wish is going to conflict with all other wishes. So now your theory predicts nothing. That means no evidence could falsify it. That means it has no scientific content. It explains everything, but that means it predicts nothing. No matter what happens, the Freudian can say, ah, yes, that reflects your desire for, then fill in the blank, because there's always something to fill in the blank with. So you can interpret everything, but that means you make no predictions. There is no actual scientific content.